November was a time. It was a time. Hello and welcome back to Overbooked. I'm Amanda and today we're going to be doing my November wrap-up. I read... How many books did I read? It feels like I read 0. I read a total of 5 books this month. Thanks for waiting. Not that you actually had to wait because I probably cut all that out. So I read Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. I read The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Jahur. And I read Winter Counts. And then I also read The Full House by Louise Erdrich. I also listened to The Undocumented Immigrants, and that was also just really great. So my original plan in November was obviously to participate in the Indigathon, which I thoroughly enjoyed for the most part that I participated in. And I was going to read all books by Indigenous authors. The Undocumented Immigrants is by a Latinx Hispanic woman who was an undocumented immigrant herself. And the reason why I read that when I did, like I read it last month because I've been having it on hold on Libby for like months and it came up. So I hopped on because I've been wanting to read that book really bad. So also, I wanted to read more books in November. I really wanted to push my limits. I thought that I was gonna have a lot more time. I took off work of the week of Thanksgiving, and I thought that I was gonna be able to just read all day, every day, and that did not happen. But my original goal was to, after every time I film a video, I would give my review on it, and then this wrap-up would be a hodgepodge of videos of me reviewing books right after I read them. And I did that for 2 of them. I did it for Johnny Appleseed, and I did that for The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. So we'll watch those first. I'll throw them in here, and then we'll come back and I'll review the rest of the books I read this month. Enjoy. Okay, so hello. I just finished Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead, and I read this book for the Indigathon. Like, I've read all the books in the month of November for Indigathon. So this book I read for the prompts. I think it was about like a story that involves intersectionality and then a book that's outside of the US. So this story takes place in Canada, and we see Johnny, and as I call him, Johnny Appleseed, in school. We see his life kind of presented in a sort of like collection of short stories. I almost feel like this was a book of short stories, essentially. But the whole premise of the book is Johnny's stepfather dies, and he has a week to get back to the reservation to attend the funeral. So he no longer lives on the reservation. He lives in a city, Winnipeg, and there he is like a cyber sex worker, is like how like Goodreads synopsis like did it. But he was, you know, used Snapchat and like other video methods to have clients and to get income that way. So in this week, he tries to get as much funds as possible to make the trek back to the reservation and attend this funeral. He not the biggest fan of his stepfather, but he is mainly going for his mom, who he knows needs the support and who he loves very much. So in this week that he's doing that, he reflects a lot about different times of his life and provides us glimpses into his past and glimpses into somewhat present tense of what's going on right now. And it's just really intriguing. And I actually really enjoyed this kind of aspect of storytelling because I feel like, and I think he kind of mentions it at some point, but I feel like in major times and events that happen in our lives, at least for me, I do reflect on just random points of my life. I remember a couple years ago, my grandmother died, and my whole family lives in South Dakota, and I live in Michigan, and I had to get on a flight and travel and to attend her funeral. And that's not like a long trek, whatever. I mean, it's like a 2-hour flight. But I remember, you know, preparing to go and, you know, the drive to the airport and in the airport and on the flight in particular, I just like, there was a lot of reflecting going on. You're just looking back, and yes, of course, I was looking back at a lot of stories about my grandmother, but I was also reflecting on a lot of things about just my life in general and what's led me to this point in my life. And that's essentially what Johnny was doing, was just looking at all these different times of his life and aspects of his life that brought us to this present tense time. And I just really like that, because I just think that that's such a beautiful way to tell a story. And I just really like that aspect of the book. I will say though, I listened to this on audio book, and I wish I would have had a printed physical copy of the book, just because it was hard to keep up with the changing pace of the stories, or when we were talking about, just because, like, for me, I really love seeing the story on the page, and it's easier for me to follow. So I would have liked that, because I think it would have led for me a better transition into the next story, or the next tense, or where we were. And that just would have been really helpful, but that was just a personal preference for me. There's just a lot of different complexities in the story, and it's really layered and interesting to dive into, because Johnny, as a queer individual, I think he goes by the pronouns he, him, but I almost think that he would almost rather be he, like they. He kept referring to himself as like femme, or that he was this native princess. So that was kind of an interesting concept of exploring, like seeing him explore his sexuality and like what he was, and trying to identify that, just especially as like a child and like leading up to what he was. And I actually don't think we really get to see him grow up into like an adult. I think he's a fairly young man. Like, I don't think he's past the age of 20 or 21. I also just think there's an interesting cast of characters around him. And the one in particular that I really enjoyed was, I just finished the book today. This is the whole reason why I'm doing this thing, is where I wrap up the books as I finish them, is so I don't forget anything. But I already forgot this person's name. His really great friend, also like on again and off again boyfriend, who he has, and how like their relationship is. And it was just interesting to see, because as his friend is like, well, I'm not gay, like, you know, I'm just here, and this is what we are. And their relationship is so intimate, and like, they've known each other for so long, since they were like young boys, like in middle school, and now they've known each other since then. So it's like intimate and close, and it's like, I would like to describe it as like it's like your second skin. Like, this person is another, like, attached to you, and you know them, and that's like how their relationship was. But it was just so hard and complicated to watch, because you saw both of them almost like, you know, fold into each other, but then retract, and fold into each other and retract, based on like just different things that were going on in their life, whether it would be like for his friend trying to come to terms with his sexuality, or, you know, Johnny going through other things in his life. And it was just, I don't know, very interesting, and I really enjoyed reading it. I think I ended up giving it like 4.5 stars. I don't know. It was just really beautiful. I just really wish, I think I would have gotten the 5 stars fully if I would have read the physical copy. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. So if you guys haven't checked it out, I think it's really worth the read. And if you do enjoy audiobooks and you don't think that'd be a problem for you, I really do recommend it. It's a pretty short audiobook. I think it was just under 6 hours for me. And that's like on 1.2 speed. I know a lot of people probably do like 3 times or whatever, but I can't keep up with that shit. But yeah, I thought it was really good, really great. I recommend it, and it's the first book that I finished for the Indigathon. So, and right now as I'm filming this, it's like November 14th, so I got a ways to go. Okay, finished another book. Yay! I finished The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Trahor. And I really enjoyed this. So I read this book for the Indigathon, like all the other books I've reading this month. And I really wanted to read this book because it had a collective history of Native American and Indigenous history and culture, and, you know, just understanding from 1890 to the present. And I just don't think that, I know that I especially don't have a lot of education on Indigenous life, Indigenous culture, Indigenous history. You know, I think even growing up in South Dakota, which this book references frequently, I don't have a lot of background knowledge on Indigenous culture or history. So I thought this would be a really helpful book to read and really digest during this month. And I thought it was very, very informative and very like well done, and really had a lot of critical information in here that I think it's worth taking the time to read this And so the author wrote this book in a response to a book that was written, I don't remember what book it was, but there was a book that came out that talked about how, or made it seem that Indigenous life was kind of like over after the battle at Wounded Knee in Montana or South Dakota, where numerous Native Americans were, you know, brutally killed. And it seemed that if, like, the narrative of that book made it seem that the culture and, like, life of Native Americans, like, ceased to exist. And David Jahor wrote this book to counter that and say that, you know, we're still here, we're still fighting to be recognized, we're still fighting for our rights, our land, and to be heard, and this is our story. And so I thought I did a really great job. He gives us some background information on, you know, from, you know, essentially the beginning of time, I guess, not really, but like 10,000 BC to 1890, which is the time of the Battle of Wounded Knee, and then takes us through that time afterwards, and each part is broken up into a section of time. And I found that, like, and I think most of us have this unconscious unconscious knowledge of how we know Native Americans, you know, got fucked over, essentially. Like, you know, white people fucked us, we fucked them over, and that's how it is. And it's such a reoccurring theme in this book that shows us really what that looked like and key critical parts of that. And I just felt like it's so interesting to read how, like, the characterizations of Indians, Native Americans, Indigenous people are that, you know, they're lazy and they don't work, or, you know, they're alcoholics. And it's like, these things stem from the situations they were put into by white people. When you confine people to a small area of land and offer them no, like, resources, you're setting them up for failure. And the book describes numerous reports of, you know, Indian life being, you know, studied, and how it would come back, you know, life on Indian land is terrible. What do we do? And it was almost like, we do a bunch of more things to help them, but it's also restricting them. And it just kind of was this repeated pattern over and over again. And it almost was, like, infuriating when he, like, talks about, you know, white people who would think that they were helping Native Americans and try to push for things for them, when in reality, it really probably would help a lot. And before pushing for these things, they didn't even think to talk to the people that it would affect. And there was no conversations between these people and the people that they thought they were helping. So there was never a conversation between, I think that this is good for you. What do you think? There was never that kind of conversation. And a lot of the times it was like, you know, chiefs or leaders of tribes would not allow things to happen, but, you know, the U.S. government or U.S. people or white people would make it so that they would coerce or, you know, bribe other people in that tribe to come off as, like, leaders or chiefs and make these decisions for them when they have essentially no power. But if they write it down on some paper, they do, you know? So it was just infuriating. I thought it was my favorite part of, I think, the history and learning about it was really examining the time during, like, the 70s and that Red Power movement, because you don't really hear about that. You don't really hear about that in your history textbooks. I think, you know, you don't really hear of their protests or their caravan to Washington, D.C. And so I just thought that was really enlightening to learn, and just knowing that they're still here, they're still around, they're still fighting, and they deserve to be heard, not just, you know, brushed under the rug because they're gone. They're not. So I really, really enjoy this book, and I've already found it useful when I'm listening to Winter Counts right now, and the author's already, like, referenced some, like, Native history, and it's been helpful in reading this book because I'm like, oh yes, I heard about that in The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. So it's actually was very helpful. My strategy of like reading this first and then trying to get to my other books is helpful in that way. But now I'm just stuck with like 5 books to read. So that's my contribution to my wrap up for November. I would recommend, if you haven't already, to read The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. Okay, we're back. I hope you had a fun time with other Amanda. She's fun. All right, so the next book I read for November was Winter Counts by David Heska Wimbley Wyden. I had to refer to his name, so I made sure I kind of pronounced it right. This was a good one. This is really good. I listened to this on Scribd, and I really enjoyed the audiobook. I loved the narrator, whoever was reading it did a really great job. But this book is about, and this is why I wanted to film my book reviews right after I read them, because I've instantly forgotten the main character's name. This book was about Virgil, and he is like this, how do I describe it? So Virgil lives on a reservation in South Dakota, Rosebud Reservation. And on this reservation, there is no, like, I don't want to say like no justice ever done, but the justice system on reservations is definitely tricky and complicated, which I learned about in The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, is that there's a lot of federal oversight and there's not a lot of like local enforcement. It's either, you know, you go to the tribal police or like the federal powers maybe have to come in, and not a lot of justice happens after that. So in this book, Winter Counts, Virgil is kind of like the last man that you can come to for justice if you want justice. And so, for example, if like you're, you know, this little girl was getting harassed at school. I'm just gonna make this up because I don't want to be too graphic, but like no one did anything about it. The parents can go to Virgil and be like, hey, kick the crap out of this guy who's harassing our daughter, and he can go and he'll like literally beat them up to a pulp. Like I was like, wow, you're scary, but also in a good way. I really enjoyed that. I like loved Virgil. You know, he's just like this man who knows like these people deserve it. He likes to give it out. He doesn't. So Virgil is also, he's half native. So a lot of the men that he beats up are like men from school, like from his past days, and used to call him like half-blood or like half-breed or something. And it's like this like cycle of, I don't know, disadvantage happening for him. And it's like this release to be able to like get back at these people. So Virgil has a nephew that he is in charge of, he's a guardian of, and because his sister has died, now he's in charge of his nephew. And so as he's like in this guardianship with his nephew, and he's in this like, you know, Robin Hood-esque, like, I don't really know Robin Hood, but like he's like doing his thing. He's like a patrol man. One of the chief councilmen come to him, or the tribal councilmen come to him and ask him like, hey, or like talk to him about how there's like a serious drug now coming around the reservation and somebody needs to stop it or find out where it's coming from. And he's like, no, I'm not really interested. Like, that's a lot to do and handle, and you know, I have my nephew to worry about. But they do offer him a lot of money, and he's like, okay. So he kind of like digs into it a little bit. Like he's like curious about it, but not like, you know, 100% in yet. So an incident happens that makes Virgil want to take this case, and he travels to Denver because that's where the trail, like the case takes him, and he's on this like kind of investigation trying to figure out who's bringing these drugs in, what's going on, and he like has his ex-girlfriend along for the ride, and they're both trying to like kind of put the pieces together. And honestly, it was really, really just a great book. It was really interesting. I was like captivated the entire time, and not only because, so I would classify this kind of as a thriller, but I also think it was like a slow burn-ish thriller, because along the way, are we not only learning about all of these complexities on the reservation, we're learning about the complexities of this case in itself, we're also just learning about these characters. Like I really felt like I knew Virgil, I felt like I knew his ex-girlfriend, and I felt like I knew this like community of people, and it just, I think that the author just did a great job of like setting up this environment and this scene and this world that I just felt like I was truly there. And at the end, I was just like, I mean, I knew that one guy was shady the entire time, but I did not think that shady. I did not think that. So Winter Counts at the end. Oof, I was like, what the heck is happening? It was nuts. It was nuts. It was such a crazy ending. I loved it. So good. If you guys haven't read Winter Counts yet, do it. So good. Okay, so the next book I read was The Roundhouse by Louise Edric, and this is my first Louise Edric book. When I finished this book, I just sat with it and I was like, wow, this was a good book. Like, it was just so good. So good. It's just good. I don't know how to put into words how good this book was. This book is a book about a family of 3, and our main character is Joe, and he's like a 13-year-old. I think he's around 13. A 13-year-old boy, and he has 2 parents. They also live on a reservation in North Dakota, different from South Dakota that we just talked about in Winter Counts. I just want to point this out because I'm from South Dakota. They're 2 different states. North Dakota, right here. So they grew up they're living on a reservation in North Dakota. It's the 1980s, late 1980s. And one day, like, him and his dad are just like, you know, hanging at the house, and they're like, where the heck is where's mom? And they go on this, like, you know, drive to go find her, and then they see her coming home, and they're like, haha, here she is. And they come home and they find her still in her car, gripping the steering wheel in shock, and they find out that their mother has been raped by somebody. They don't know who. What's interesting is that this is also kind of another, like, example of, like, what justice looks like, I guess, on a reservation, or I guess not necessarily. I mean, I don't think that every single, like, book or example is, like, what actually happens in every single scenario, but I think this is a good peek behind the curtain on, like, what this justice system looks like and how really unfair it is. So Joe's father is a judge on the reservation, but he's a judge in tribal court. So he automatically is, like, trying to figure this case out. He's trying, like, one of the first discussions, like, when they can finally talk to his mom, because she doesn't talk for, like, a day or 2 or a couple of days, which is understandable. He keeps trying to ask her where it happened, because it's so crucially important to know where the crime happened, because that's what determines if it's in tribal jurisdiction. It can be, if the case can be charged by tribal enforcement, or if it's outside of tribal land, then it's a federal case. So, and if it's a federal case, there's such a lower probability that any justice is going to be done, or that the case will actually ever be solved. And so, like, he's desperately trying to figure out, like, you could see, like, it's almost like you can, like, hear the desperation in his voice, because, like, he wants this so bad for his wife. And she automatically is like, which I almost thought, it was a very, very short, like, sentence and passage, but I thought it was very powerful. And she was just, her reply was simply just, do not treat me like one of your cases. And then she just, you know, turns away. And it's just, I don't know why, that just really packed a punch for me. But Joe obviously is very affected by his mother's brutal attack, and he knows that nothing is getting done. He knows that the person who did it is getting away with it. And so he and his friends start out on this, like, case of their own, and they decide that they're going to try to take matters into their own hands and try to figure this thing out. And it's this, like, interesting kind of, like, I don't know how to describe it, like, this mystery thriller contemporary book, but from the perspective of a 13-year-old boy in an adult fiction book. And it was just very interesting, because it's like the adult Joe is reflecting on his 13-year-old self, because at some points he'll be like, you know, me and my friends are hanging out, and I see this girl, and who would later become my wife. And so we know, like, he ends up okay. Like, he's telling the story from a different time, reflecting on it. There's just a hodgepodge of characters. Joe has so many, like, almost like family people in his community, and you see him going around to these different like groups of people who are, you know, not only just holding him up but trying to hold his family up. And that was like just beautiful to see, like the simplicity of him just walking into a home, and I could tell that he felt home, if that makes sense. It was just really like a beautiful thing, just like the community aspect of this book that I think that Louise put together was really beautiful. But what I just loved about this book is just like how much like the characters like draw you in. Like I really felt like Joe and his father's like just determination and need to catch this person and catch this guy, and their like protectiveness and love and desire to get justice for their mother was just so strong in the pages. I just loved this book. I loved it so much. If you haven't read it, I really think you should. This is actually been on my Goodreads list, like to read, like on my like want to read list for, I'm not even gonna lie, like a handful of years, like a couple of years. And I don't know why I waited this long to read it. It was so good. If there was any book that I had to suggest of all the books I read this month, this is the first one I think I would suggest. It was so good. Okay, I'm done. Okay, so the last book that I read this month was The Undocumented Americans by Carla Correno Vallecasino. I know I didn't pronounce that correctly, but she's a boss. And I think I misspoke when I was earlier speaking about that book. So Carla writes this book, and she's on DACA when she decides to write this book. And she writes this book because she wants to show you what the real life of an undocumented immigrant is. It's not always this sad story, but it's also like this story of like community and resilience and just average people who just do average things. And it really hit just so like hard. I also think it shows like so many different aspects of like the undocumented experience too as well. Like I think the most eye-opening part for me was, and I had no idea, was that she has a whole chapter dedicated to 9/11 and how many undocumented people were at the site of 9/11 helping to clean up and build that community back up. And those people never, and still have not, gotten compensated or the essential health care that they need, because they did not have, when these workers came in to clean up the site, they were not given the proper protective wear. So a lot of them have like medical conditions related to cleaning up 9/11 because there was so much dust, there was so much debris, there was so much like just, you know, a lot of hard labor went into like trying to clean up this site. And a lot of them still have health problems today that have gone like unaddressed and, you know, not confronted. And it's kind of just like bizarre to me how, you know, I think 9/11 is a very, you know, important day for a lot of Americans. It's a thing that's remembered. It'll be remembered forever. The day we won't forget. And to have this group of people come in and help build us back up, help build all of us collectively back up, and how we wouldn't compensate them or treat them the way that they needed to be treated for doing this work that no one else would do. I just think it's like bullshit. So not okay with that. But she like does that. She like dives into these just these stories of different like pictures of the undocumented life, and while also reflecting on her own undocumented life. And that's kind of what I'm referring to when I think I misspoke earlier, is I think she is, when she was writing this book, I think she was still undocumented. And I haven't really looked into see if she has recently become a citizen or what her status is now. But regardless, that's what, like, she knows what's going on. She has a very keen sense of how these people feel. She like feels a lot of their same emotions herself, and we see her story along the way as we see all these other pictures of other stories. I just thought it was a really brilliant book. I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And if you haven't read it, I really highly encourage you to. It was like a 5-hour audiobook. Honestly, I thought about getting this for my dad. He's retiring next year, and I think that this might be a good book for him to kind of learn about a different group of people outside of his own, because it was just so short, and I felt like it was very to the point, and I felt like there was a lot of people in there that you could relate to. I just thought it was very, very good. So that was my November wrap up, and I'm hoping December will be better. I still have books that I'm trying to read for the Indigathon that I didn't finish that are probably super overdue at the library at this point. We're gonna try to get there. So, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's also like Vlogmas, Bookmas, so I might look into that, see if I want to participate. I think I've already missed a couple deadlines, but you know, maybe 12 days of Christmas or something. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. In the comments below, let me know if you participated in Indigathon and what your favorite book was that you read, what you're reading right now. Just let me know any book-related stuff, or if you just want to say hi, let me know. Remember to like this video, and if you haven't already, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.